Hi everybody, my name's Brennand and I'm the manager for Sendiass North Yorkshire. I'm going to be answering questions in the chat box, so there should be a Q&A or a chat box that pops up on your screens. And if you've got any questions while we're going along, if you just want to type those into there, if there's some that I can answer as a quick answer, I'll do it there and then. If they need a longer answer, then Angela and I will go through them at the end, and I'll pass you on to Angela.
Good morning, everybody. It's a bit of a wild and windy day in North Yorkshire, isn't it? Hi, I'm Angela Cavill. I'm a Sendiass coordinator and I provide a little bit of management support, and I've been having fun with Jan putting all of these webinars together. So welcome to the webinar today. It's about education, health and care plan assessment requests. And sorry, I've just realised I haven't shared my screen, have I? Oh dear, you see. Rookie error.
Don't worry.
Here we go.
A short survey at the end of this webinar. If you could complete that, that'd be really useful for all of us.
Right, there we go. Oh dear me, you see. Let's take it to the beginning. Right, okay. So we'll start again. So again, it's a webinar about assessment requests. Sometimes you'll see these referred to in North Yorkshire as an EHCP, and sometimes you'll see it referred to as an EHCP, which is a needs assessment. It might also help for you to take a look at our SEN support webinar, which looks at what should happen in terms of special educational needs support before getting to the point of needing an EHCP assessment. So we hope this webinar is useful to you. So firstly, what is an EHCP assessment request? So an assessment request for an education, health and care plan is submitted where a child or young person has or may have special educational needs and is not making expected progress with the support that is available. In this webinar, we're going to look at the assessment request process, focusing particularly on a parent or young person request, but we will look briefly at a request that comes in from, a nursery, a school or a college. So what does the law say? The Children and Families Act says that the local authority must secure an education, health and care needs assessment for the child or young person if, after having regard to any views expressed and evidence submitted under subsection 7, the authority is of the opinion that A, the child or young person has or may have special education needs, and B, that it may be necessary for special educational provision to be made for the child or young person in accordance with an EHC plan. So as you can see, this is a low threshold when it says that the child or young person has or may have an SEN and that it may be necessary for special educational provision to be made via an EHCP. So who can make a request for an assessment? The Special Education Needs Code of Practice says that the following people can make a request: the child's parent, a young person over the age of 16 but under the age of 25, and with the knowledge and agreement of the parent or young person where possible. And in addition, anyone else can bring a child or young person who has or may have special educational needs to the attention of the local authority, particularly where they think an EHC needs assessment may be necessary. So as you can see, in addition to parents, carers and young people and educational professionals, anyone else can bring a child or young person to the attention of the local authority as needing an assessment. This might include health and social care professionals, foster carers, youth justice workers, etc. I do think it's important to acknowledge, though, that we very, very rarely see requests coming in from other people other than parents, carers, young people or educational settings. So this webinar again will concentrate mostly on a parent or young person request. So we'll look at when should a request be made. Again, the Code of Practice says that the majority of children and young people with SEN or disabilities will have their needs met within local mainstream early years settings, schools or colleges. But where a child or young person hasn't made expected progress with all of the SEN support provided, and where a setting has exhausted all possible means of support, an assessment request would be appropriate. It's also important to remember that on occasion, a child or young person may come into a setting, or their circumstances might have changed suddenly, necessitating an assessment request to be made. The local authority has its own criteria for when an assessment should be requested. The school may say that they cannot submit a request until all of this criteria has been met. So, for example, 2 rounds of assess, plan, do, review, involvement of specialist teachers, involvement of an educational psychologist, etc. But again, remember that the law says that a child or young person should have an assessment if she or he has or may have an SEN, and that it may be necessary for special educational provision to be made via an EHCP. So we'll look first at nursery, school and college requests. So where an educational setting is submitting a request, they must use a form, and I'm going to show that on screen now. So just bear with me while I stop my share and start with something else. Right, here we go. Here we are. Can everybody see that? Yeah. So this is the form that the schools and colleges use, and some of you may have had sight of these already. I always point out that, again, the local authority have printed in red on the front page. Let me just take it, there we go. And
Angela,
again, yes, sorry.
Could I just ask, if you reduce the pictures of us, it'll make that a little bit bigger. It's just a little bit small, I think. From
Is it a bit small?
Yeah, can you possibly reduce?
Is that any better?
Just so it goes full screen.
It is on mine.
Ah, it could be at my end. Don't worry about it. It could just be
right.
Me.
Okay. Well, it's just again. The link is sorry. The link is on the.
It's me. It'll be me.
Is on the slide anyway. So so if you can't see it too well, then you can always click onto the link after the webinar. But again, I always like to point out that in bright red on the front page, it says, you know, it talks about the vast majority of situations, the local authority expect 2 cycles of assess, plan, do, review. And that, you know, they say it's not essential, but you know, you might not have sufficient evidence without it. Again, I would go back to that legal test. The legal test doesn't talk about 2 rounds of assess, plan, do, review. So it's always important to think about that. Again, the setting can only submit a request with the permission of yourself as a parent, a carer, or a young person aged 16 to 25. And they must ask you or your young person to sign the form agreeing to the request. So this, again, sometimes when parents contact the local authority and say they want to submit a request, you will be sent this form. And it's quite a daunting form. And what we always say is contact us. We're going to talk through a model letter fairly soon, but we suggest that you only fill in the contact details at the beginning, and then the child's views, section A, all about me. So that talks, you know, it talks about things like what I'm good at, what people like about me, what's going well for me, etc. And then scroll down, and again, it's parent or carer views. And then again, there's also a consent form. So if you contact us at Sendiass North Yorkshire, we have abridged that form. So hopefully that will be really helpful. But that's the form that a school or college, etc., would use. So I'll just stop that share, and I'll go back to the presentation. Here we go. With a bit of luck. There we are. There we are. Okay, so we've had a quick look at that. So again, what will an educational setting need to complete for the request? So again, they need to send in the Education, Health and Care Assessment Request form that we've just briefly looked at. They need to send in any reports. They could be observations, assessments from other professionals, if they have them, who they've asked to be involved during the SEN support stage, cost information of SEN support, parent views, child or young person's views and aspirations. It's really important that we kind of know what children, young people are wanting for the future, and any other relevant information. It is so important that the setting should involve yourself and your child or young person to give your views. And this includes how you feel things are now and also the challenges and strengths of children and young people. So again, we've briefly looked at an educational setting request. Now let's look in more detail at a parent or young person request for an EHCP assessment. Before submitting your request for an EHCP assessment, we always strongly recommend talking with someone from your child or young person's educational setting first. You can have a discussion about your child or young person's needs and hopefully get the information you need as to whether to submit a request or not. Your discussion with the setting should include information about any progress made, the child or young person's strengths and challenges, the provision that has been in place under SEN support, and what the setting plans to do next to try and meet needs. You could also look at our leaflet on SEN support, which gives information about the duties of educational settings. The link to this is on the screen. We would also suggest that at this point you ask if the setting is prepared to submit a request for assessment. If the setting is not prepared to do this, and they don't have to do this, you have the right to submit a request. However, we would always suggest that you let the setting know that you are doing this, as they will be contacted by the local authority and ask for lots of information to help the local authority make their decision. So, making a parental request for a child aged 0 to 16 years, we recommend that parents and carers use a letter template to make the request. This is available on our website and there is a link in this slide. I'm going to look at that in more detail on the next slide. We also suggest that you check out our EHCP assessment leaflet available on our website, and again the link to this is on the slide. Some of you may already be aware of the organisation called Contact, who provide information and support for families who have children with additional needs. They have a range of information about the EHCP process, and we suggest that you look at their checklist for an EHCP assessment request. It's a very useful resource. In fact, the Contact site has lots of useful information about lots of things, not just the EHCP process. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to bring up the template letter. So bear with me, folks. Here we are. Okay. Right. I hope you can all see that. We'll start at the beginning. So again, I'm going to talk through each part of the letter. So again, it's a model letter. It's organised by an organisation called EHCP. Oh dear, my brain. So again, it starts with personal details, and the letter is sent to Nikki Joyce, who is the head of SEND for North Yorkshire County Council. So it goes to her, but it will be dealt with by SEN Business Support. So again, you have to make sure that you've got your personal details, your address, your contact details. If you have an email address, that's incredibly helpful. So again, you've got the date on that. The date's very important because the clock starts ticking once the local authority register your request. They have that 6 weeks, which we'll talk about a bit about later. So again, first and foremost, it's your personal details, and then it's your child or young person's name and the date of birth. Again, if you know your child by a different name, for example, I don't know, we'll go with Billy Jones, but their name is William. If you could use their full name, it's very helpful for the local authority when they're actually looking for a child on their system. But you can also put known as Billy. So again, child's details, that it's a request for an education, health and needs assessment, and then it's a very, very straightforward letter. Again, it says what you're doing, that you would like an assessment for your child. It talks about the law in terms of that the LA must consider the request, and then it goes into more detail. It wants to know if the child has or may have special educational needs. So again, if your child has had their needs identified by the school, then you can put that into the letter. You can say if your child's on their special educational needs register, and then you can list. I often suggest parents use a bullet point format here and just identify the SEN. So for example, if you have a child who's been diagnosed with autism, and they also have dyslexia, and they also have maybe some anxiety, you can just list those in a bullet point format. So again, then you need to start by, then you need to go on to saying why you feel that the child needs an education, health and care plan assessment. So again, that can be things like, you know, if you feel the child needs more assistance in school, or they need some specific interventions, or they need, you know, some teaching assistant support, some small group work, all those sorts of things. So, and again, you need to sort of try to point out why you feel the school can't provide what your child needs. And for many children, they will have gone through several rounds of assess plan, do review already. So you've got that evidence there. What I also suggest, again, so that's sort of the letter in a nutshell. And again, it's addressing the two-part test. A, do they have or may have SEN, and might they need an EHCP? And then obviously at the end, it just, you know, it reminds the local authority they've got 6 weeks to respond to you, and then it puts your details on there. We'll talk again in a minute about what happens if this is a young person's request, because this would be a parental request, as again for a child 0 to 16. If you have any relevant reports or diagnostic letters, you should consider sending those in as evidence along with the letter, although it's important to recognise that a diagnosis doesn't mean that a child or young person has specific needs. These are always based on needs. But I think it does help to give the local authority a flavour of what's happening. So again, could be diagnostic letters, observation reports, professional reports. If these contain recommendations about the support that is needed, that is very helpful. What we do say is don't attach clinic or therapy appointment letters or information about disability living allowance if the child or young person receive this, as they are not relevant to the request. And try to ensure that any reports, etc., are fairly recent, for example, within the last 18 months to 2 years. Obviously, if your child was diagnosed, say, with ADHD 5 years ago, then I would still include that diagnostic letter, because it's really important. So again, what to include? Oh, now then we need to go back to the, bear with me folks. Oh dear. Right, let's go back to the presentation. There we are. Okay, so we've looked at the request letter, and again, it's a very straightforward letter to put together, but again, you could think about other things about adding to the content of the letter. So it could be things like when you first noticed the difficulties for your child, how the child is now, for example, their physical health, their behaviour, their learning, what they enjoy at school, what they find difficult, relationships, so it could be around friendships at school, homework, impact of extra help that has been given, etc. And again, your child's views, so how they feel about school, what do they like best, what are their challenges, again, what do they think they need. It's really important. I know it's difficult for some children, it's difficult for some adults, isn't it, to say what we need, but nevertheless it's important to try to encourage the child to say what they think they need, because sometimes they have some very useful insights for us. We need to think about their hopes and dreams for the future. So where a child has an EHCP, we often say that the child's aspirations and hopes for the future should run like a golden thread throughout the EHCP. And so if we start looking at that at the assessment phase, I think that's really helpful. Again, what would the child like to achieve? As suggested earlier, you might want to also have a look at the assessment request checklist provided by Contact, because it's incredibly useful. So we'll now look at making a request where it's a young person making the request. So for young people aged 16 to 25 years, the request must be in their name. They might need support from a family member or a friend or an advocate to help them do this. So to help a young person understand more about the EHCP process, they could watch the video available on our website, and the link is on the screen. Again, I think it's really important that young people know what is happening. I was speaking to a parent the other day, and the young person isn't really aware of what the whole EHCP process means, and so he was having to write this request with support, but didn't really understand what he was doing. And so we took it a stage back, if you like, so that he had a better understanding of what an EHCP might mean for him. So again, we looked at the template letter, and again, we recommend that you use that template letter. I think it's really important that it's understood that it must be written in sort of present tenses. I am making this request, because it's the young person making the request. And I think it's really important in the first sentence that the young person acknowledges that they are receiving help to do this from a parent or other relative, a friend, or a professional acting as their advocate. Again, so again, it's the same format again, explaining what the SCN are, if the college, the post-16 institution have said that they recognise SCN, and to recognise what the young person is hoping for from an EHCP. If at all possible, the letter should be signed by the young person, but I acknowledge that that's not possible for all young people, but the majority can do that. So what would happen next after the request has been submitted? The local authority must let you or your young person know their decision, again, no later than 6 weeks after they receive your request. Their decision will be either to carry out an education, health and care plan assessment, or refuse to carry out an education, health and care plan assessment. So please remember that if the LA refuses to assess, there are appeal options, and we always sort of say, come and talk to us at Sendiass North Yorkshire for advice and information about this. And again, you can do that through a variety of methods, as I'm sure many of you are aware already. You can book a 20-minute consultation with us, you can come through our advice line, etc. So what next? Again, we recommend that you check out our website. There's lots of information there about the education, health and care plan process, including assessment requests. Again, give our line a call. The line is very, very busy. It's open 9:30 to 1 p.m. Weekdays during term time. It gets extremely busy, so if the line's engaged or you ring outside of hours, then just leave a message and we try as hard as possible to pick up calls at the next available session. Again, you could also email into our advice line, and then we can send you out lots of information about the assessment request process. And I think many of you will now know that we have a very, very active Facebook and Twitter, Facebook and Twitter sites linked to our website, and we get lots of information through there. And we also have YouTube now, and so you will find a short version about education, health and care plan assessment requests on there, but also lots of other really helpful resources. So again, if you'd like to learn more, you can check out our free web workshops on a range of SCN issues, are all being done through the Parent Carer Voice, and we thank them very much for hosting these. And again, you can contact them to see if there's anything that particularly interests you. They've got lots of exciting things going on at the moment. So again, if you'd like further information support, please talk to us. We love talking with parents and offering advice and information, etc. We hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and if you could let us know via our feedback form on our website. I know that Jan will probably talk to you about this a little bit more, because we're always looking for feedback and things that you've enjoyed and things that you'd like to suggest. But thank you for your time. Should we go into questions now, Jan, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Angela. Apologies for my interruption earlier. My screen was set up as side by side, so I didn't. I hadn't done that. I don't know why it did that, and I couldn't get out of it, but never mind. So thank you very much. That was really helpful, Angela. So quite a few questions I managed to answer as we were going along, but some of them I think I'll bring up, and there's a couple that I did say I'd leave till the end.
Okay.
So one parent was talking about their child had been denied an education healthcare plan request, and what could she do? So I just to say that there is the means of refusal to assess, which I'm sure you touched on in the webinar, and we are going to be running one specifically on refusal to assess. So if you or your school puts in a request for an education healthcare assessment and it is denied at the first hurdle, you will get a letter from the local authority giving you your right of appeal, and it's worth putting in a refusal to assess appeal, and you can come to us for help with that. But there is a refusal to assess leaflet on our website you can download, which gives you details of that. And also on our website, under appealing to the Send Tribunal, there are videos on how to complete the tribunal form. So we will be covering that in a longer webinar as well on refusal to assess. Somebody else asked about what did it mean by 2 cycles? Did it mean 2 lots of assessments? So I've explained. Do you want to explain that in more detail? I have gone back to that parent, but I just think it's a good one to clarify.
No, I think so. Yeah, when we talk about cycles, it's this assess, plan, do, review. And if you go into our SEN support webinar, there's a short one on our YouTube, but I think is the one recorded on Parent Carer Voice as well.
Yes, because we did do
the original one we did, so it talks about that. But again, it's this assess, plan, do. Oh, thank you, Rianne. It's about this assess, plan, do, review. So when we talk about 2 cycles, we're talking about 2 cycles of assess, plan, do, review, and often schools will say that each one of those takes a term. So you're already sort of 6 months down the line. So yeah. Have I answered that properly? I don't know.
Yeah, and sometimes schools will come back and say they can't submit for an education healthcare request because they have to do 2 cycles of the assess, plan, do, review. That's not actually the case in law, although it is considered good practice in the Code of Practice. It isn't always necessary. And if a child, for example, moves to a new school or moves into area and they clearly have a significant need, then the school it's not always possible to do those 2 terms. They need the support and they need it now, and the local authority will accept those requests.
Yeah, it's important to acknowledge that difference between the criteria the LA use, like I talked about earlier, and what the law says. And so, for example, you might have a school who haven't actually done what they maybe should have done under the SEN support system, and you as a parent might not be prepared to wait any longer. And so, you know, then you could put in a request. The LA will ask lots of questions of the school during that 6-week phase while they're deciding whether to assess or not. But I think it's important to recognise that yes, the LA have their criteria, but that isn't the law.
Yeah, and also I think adding to that, some SENCOs are under the impression that they can't submit without the assess, plan, review. And that isn't the case. And it's sometimes that the SENCO isn't being awkward. They actually think that that is the case, and it's just a case of showing them that actually yes they can if that need is there. Another one, a parent has tried to get the school to submit an EHCP, and the school is saying that there isn't a reason for one, and the child has now been diagnosed with autism and executive function issues, and the parent said, should I get on with it myself? And I've said, absolutely, you can do that. But she had an EP report done 3 years ago, and she's saying, should I include it? Now, my initial thoughts were, you need to see if it's still relevant. It was done in a previous provision, so obviously that provision did recognise. So and the new school hasn't done one. Now, what I will say, whether you include it or not, the LA will already have a copy. If that was done in a North Yorkshire school, the LA will have that educational psychologist report on the child's file. What you really need to do is check, because it is 3 years ago, have the needs changed? So does that EP report say, you know, needs can be met within the mainstream setting, doesn't need an assessment? And then you've got to think, is that really useful? Because if the child, for example, I don't know the age, but has moved from primary to secondary, then those needs will have changed and that report's really out of date. However, if it is identifying some needs that are still relevant, you could highlight the parts of that report that are still relevant and point out the ones that aren't and still submit it. But do be aware that the local authority will, if it's a North Yorkshire provision that did that, it will still have a copy. Is there anything I need to add to that, Angela?
No, I think that covers it. Yeah.
And the other one I thought would be a good one to answer at the end is about the assessment process being impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. One parent is feeling that the school was looking at the 2 cycles of assess, plan, redo, and they didn't happen. There was no reviews, etc., because of lockdown, and she wants to know, does she have to wait and it all start again now that the child's gone back in September?
No, I don't think you do. No, you know, the fact is the problem is, how long do you wait? And, you know, we talk to parents sometimes who have been waiting years, haven't they, Jan? You know, the child's been through so many cycles of assess, plan, do, review. It's interesting sometimes that we might look at, they're called individual provision maps for children on SEN support. And sometimes we see them and there have been absolutely no changes to those individual provision maps for years. That the same targets are being sought, the same interventions are being put in, and yet you can see there's no progression. And so it's a question of how long do you wait? And I think sometimes putting in a parental request can be a catalyst to apart from the fact that your child is brought to the attention of the local authority, then the school might have more scrutiny on them as well, to say, well, what is it that you've done? What are you doing for this child?
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Another parent saying that she's struggling because the school SENCO has been resistant even with the child's diagnosis, and she feels at a loss. So my suggestion with that would be, do it yourself, put in a parental request for assessment if you're not getting anywhere with the school. If you know your child has a diagnosis, you're saying, so there is a recognised need, and as Angela said at the start of the webinar, you know, the bar is very, very low. It is that your child may have SEN or has SEN, so whether or not assessment should proceed. So you could put in a request. You may find that the local authority turns it down, because if the school are not on board, then it depends what they fill in on that ECAR, because they will get sent their part of the ECAR to complete. You will have your part to complete and the letter to send in. And then you could look at doing a refusal to assess appeal. And you don't, with a refusal to assess, you don't actually appear, it's all done on the paperwork, but you could also ask for a mediation meeting. And these are being done via Zoom at the moment, but you could have that mediation meeting and discuss that you feel the school are not recognising need. And that your child does have a need, and it may well be that the local authority will agree to assess on that. It's well worth going down that road if you really feel that.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think as well that as parents, you are the experts on your children. There's nobody knows your child like you. And so it's important to if you feel, if your gut feeling is that actually things aren't progressing, and that even with SEN support, or where a school hasn't put in SEN support, it is worth putting in that request to see how things go. And if I give an example, many years ago, I worked with a family where the child was in a mainstream school, and the parents submitted a parental request. The local authority refused it, so I supported the parent to appeal that, and obviously that was overturned, and the child was assessed. And then the local authority refused to issue an EHCP, and then we appealed that, and we, you know, the parent won that, and the child was issued with an EHCP, and the child actually was given a place at a school for children with extremely significant special educational needs. So gone from a mainstream school into that setting, and that need had not been recognised, and it was only because the parent put in the parental request that that child ended up getting the provision that they needed. And I know it's an extreme example, but as I say, I'm a big believer in parental gut instinct.
Yes, definitely. You do know your children the best. Okay, we've got a couple more. So what is an IPM? That is an individual provision map. schools call these by different names. So already, if your child has got an IPM, an individual provision map, and is on the SEN register and is receiving support from the communication team, then you would need to look at, does your child need any further support that can only be provided through an education healthcare plan? Because obviously support is provided through SEN support, and we covered that in the SEN support webinar, and there is an SEN snapshot about that on our YouTube. Not all children with an education healthcare plan with an SEN require their needs to be met through an education healthcare plan. So the school could be meeting it through what we call element 2 funding, which is approximately up to £6,000. So you would need to look at that. The school may say, well, actually, we're already doing what we need to do to meet need, and therefore we don't need education healthcare plan on top of what they're already doing through their element 2 delegated budget. So that's something to be aware of as well, that not all children will need a plan, and for some the need is met. So obviously in that particular case, the school are putting that provision in place, and they should then be assessing that and reviewing it and seeing if that's enough. Is the child making progress as would be expected? And if they're not, that's when the school may say, actually, we need to go further with this.
And again, with the individual provision maps, because schools all seem to have different names for them, it can get very complicated sometimes. So some have kept the individual educational plans, and they were in place up until 2014, weren't they, Jan? And
yeah.
Some schools will call them pupil passports and inclusion passports. I have to say, though, my experience of looking at the passport type things, they're not really an SEN plan. That's just my experience. But again, all schools have different names for them, but they are a plan that should be reviewed at least termly, and you should have the opportunity to have your input into that along with your child or young person.
And we have another one, which is one, Angela will smile when I read it out, because it's one we get asked an awful lot, and we often hear the wrong information being given out. So, will a private diagnosis for autism be taken as seriously as an NHS diagnosis? See, I told you she'd smile. We've even got a giggle.
Well, yeah, it's a question we're asked an awful lot. As long as a child, if they have a private diagnosis, as long as that diagnosis has been given by a suitably qualified and accredited person, then that must be accepted by the local authority. And certainly if anything went to a tribunal, if it was a report written by such a person, it would be accepted and the recommendations would be used. And so, yes, it must be taken as seriously.
Yeah, you just need to be careful if you are going to go for a private diagnosis, that the person you are getting that diagnosis from is member of a recognised body. So anybody that can do an autism diagnosis has to be a member of a regulated body in order to be able to give that diagnosis. And quite often the same regulated body that regulates NHS clinical psychologists. So just always check that, because in law it carries the exact same way. If they are members of this regulated body, they have to work to certain legal standards, and therefore, for example, I mean, in the area I live in Lancashire, the person who actually ran CAMS for the East Lancashire, she set up on her own and left her CAMS position. And obviously her reports, just because they were written privately and not as she was as the clinical lead for CAMS, they carried the same amount of weight because she had the same qualification she had before and was a member of the same recognised body. So that just gives you in an example.
And that goes for any professional. So if you decide to ask for a private educational psychology assessment, private OT, private SALT, again, just beware that you need to make sure that person is accredited. Otherwise they won't be taken as gospel, if you like, by the local authority.
Another interesting question. So the lady that asked about the individual provision map has said, can she request to see it?
Of course. Yes.
You should have seen it. You should have been part of it.
You should have been part of it. Yes, absolutely. And it's not a surprising question, because again, we talk to a lot of parents whose child might be on the SEN register, but they've never had sight of an individual provision map. What worries me more are the schools who don't put a child on their SEN register. They, one school told me they had an internal watch list. And actually the child I talked about who went into very specialist provision was on the school's internal watch list. They hadn't actually informed the local authority through their SEN register that that child had any needs at all. So yes, and again, if you go onto the SEN support webinar, it talks about the need for dialogue with parents and for schools to inform parents right from the get-go that they feel a child has special educational needs. So yes, worrying.
Yes, yes, you should absolutely have a copy and be a part of formulating that document. And that document, that individual request, should also actually be reviewed, and you should be a part of that reviewing process. So yes, most definitely. Now somebody's has raised their hand, so I'm guessing they want to ask a verbal question. Graham, can you see that, Rhiann?
I can unmute Graham, but I would be mindful to say that everything on this is being recorded. So if you are giving individual information, please be aware that it will be available to share at a later date.
Yeah, or if you want, Graham, you can type it into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen or the chat box, and we can answer it. That's why I've not mentioned any parents' names when I've been giving out answers, because it is recorded.
I think the safest way is probably to type it into the chat box, and then we can allow a question to come that way, or contact Sendiass directly.
Yes, yeah. About to say, if Graham wants to contact us directly.
Have we got? Is the one in the chat box? Let me have a look.
Yeah, my child has been on the SEN register since November 2018. We've never seen the school's IPM or support plan, and they will not support the EHCP application despite our son having level 10 autism diagnosis. Are we able to apply on basis of lack of support from school, hence needing EHCP? Yeah, if school haven't been involving you, and your gut instinct is that your child needs an EHCP assessment request, yeah, you absolutely can apply.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would suggest that you do apply, and I would actually put into that model letter that you are, because that model letter that Angela showed, you just copy and paste bits of it and take bits out. I would be putting into that you are aware that your child has been on the SEN register since November, and you have never ever seen a copy of the individual pupil provision map or the support plan, and you wish to apply for an assessment, and then the school will have to produce those documents as part of that assessment process.
And I think as well that where that's happened, you could actually write to your SEN governor at the school, not with a complaint as such, but raising a concern to say, you know, this has happened, and are they aware of that in their school? Because only if they are aware can they actually start to talk with the SENCO and the head teacher, etc., and get that changed. Because again, how many children on the SEN support register? The parents haven't seen the IPM, so you don't know what the targets are for your child. You don't know if they've been achieved. You know, it's yeah, that's what I would do, as well as putting in that request.
Right, I think that's everybody. I don't think there's any more. Is there, Rhiann? I can't see any more coming up.
I can't see any more.
Oh, hang on.
No, I think from Graham that they'd pressed the wrong button, but a massive thank you, and that they've learned quite a bit.
Oh, there is one more.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. So the parent who was asking about the SEN another parent was told that their child could come off the SEN register at any time. They'd done a pen portrait when he first started in school, and they've updated the relevant information, but they've had limited communication with the SENCO, and they've got difficulties. They've got concerns he may have difficulties with his spelling, but she's too afraid to ask. My advice is do ask, and you could always send it via an email for some updated. And they don't just come off the SEN register at any time. They come off if they no longer need to be there because they are making progress as would be expected, and that they're not having anything, any additional or different provision put in place. So you would only take a child off if they were making normal, what is considered normal progress, without any interventions from the school. So they can't just say we're going to take them off, or we're not going to, I'm going to keep them on. So again, as Angela said, you know your child best. If you are concerned and if you want an assessment, then you could always request that. But in this case, I would go to the school and say, you know, you could ask for a meeting to discuss your child's progress and what support they are putting in place.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't think we've got any more now. No.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
If that's okay. If everybody on here today, if you're not part of Parent Carer Voice, if you haven't joined our membership list yet, please do, because the video versions of these webinars that we're recording will be going onto our Facebook page. And if you join up via the website, we can then put you into our closed parent group within Facebook, where there is no professionals, it's all peer-to-peer support, us parents supporting each other. We also have other Sendiass events coming up, as well as NYCC webinars about the new Send hubs. So that's where you'll get all the information on what we're doing within things. So it's definitely worthwhile having a look.
Thank you, Rhiann.
Yeah, and also we are doing another webinar next Friday morning at 11 o'clock. That's going to be on what are the contents of an education healthcare plan, what should be in a plan when you've got one. So if you want to sign up for that. Rhiann, somebody's asking, how do they sign up to Parent Carer Voice?
If you go to our website, which is www.parentcarervoiceuk.org, I'm just trying to type it in the chat box at the same time as say it, and look in the Join Us section. There is a membership form you fill in there. If you then find us on Facebook, we cross-reference our membership to the Facebook group and we'll add you in that way.
Lovely. There's some lovely feedback as well from parents, you know, saying thank you, massive thank you, you've learnt such a lot in such a short space of time. I'm going to beg, can you please go on our website, and at the top right hand side there's a feedback button. If you just click on it, it'll say, how did you contact us? Actually, we need to put training in that as an option. It doesn't actually say that, so just click on Facebook, maybe social media.
There is a short 4-question survey when we end this webinar. There'll be a short 4-question survey that'll come up, so we can share that feedback.
And ours, although it doesn't have the training on it, you can add comments, and it's the comments that add depth to, you know, to the response. And you'll find the same thing, won't you, Rhiann? But again, it's looking at the quality, and again, if you've got anything that you would particularly like us to do a webinar about, there's going to be a string of them, aren't there, Jan?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you know, any suggestions are very welcome.
Yeah, thank you. If you could complete that, it just helps us. I have to do a report to the Council for Disabled Children, and I submitted our latest one on Friday, and I used all the comments from all the webinars that we've done before in that report to show that, you know, this is what parents and carers were saying. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thanks again, Rhiann, for hosting.
Thank you.
And thank you, Angela. That was fabulous.
Except for the hitches, yes.
No, that was my fault. Right, bye everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
See you at the next one.
Bye. Bye. Thanks, Rhiann.